Streaming now, this is the Wood TV
related
Live
to
Desk.
surveillance technology in our community. Just to give a little bit more background info, for some time the local Grand Rapids branch has been working with Grand Rapids Police Department as well as other city officials on helping improve on the relations between Grand Rapids Police and community. And one of the areas that we have been working with them on is amending the administrative policy for surveillance technology. So basically what that is there's a policy that's in place right now that states there's certain steps that should be taken before the police department is allowed to acquire certain pieces of technology such as shot spotter, unmanned drones, and helicopters. What we feel as of right now, the way that the policy stands now, it's not sufficient enough to do two things: protect the civil rights of community and also just allow community involvement in the process. So we have three major amendments to the policy that we want to propose, with one being related to the definition of exigent circumstances. We feel that the way that that is currently detailed, it does not protect citizens, so we have asked that they change that or remove that language and input some other language in that policy. One of the second changes that we've requested is that they allow for more community involvement in the process. So we've established a community board that should be allowed to review these technology purchases before the police department is allowed to acquire them. And lastly, these pieces of technology can be quite costly. So what we propose as a third amendment is that instead of investing those into traditional police practices, we would request that they would invest those dollars into other proven community programs, such as the work going on here at the Grand Rapids Center for Community Transformation. With that said, I want to go ahead and introduce my colleague, Ms. Gail Harvey, and she'll talk a little bit more about some of those community investment areas, and then we'll go ahead and pass it to Carlton Mayers, and he'll provide some more information.
Hello, I am Gail Harvey with the NAACP, and we do have quite a few community outreach programs that we are working on. We are specific to working in community and specific to community voices, and we do want to have the relationships with law enforcement. So here at the Center for Community Transformation, just a few things to name to you. We're currently exploring the workforce programs and with community partners such as Steelcase, Grand Circus, Amway, Bissell. We have a partnership with MDOC and a company, her company, which is a construction company, and what that company does is it offers training to people who are coming from being incarcerated and allows them to succeed in the construction trade. We also have a youth program that's very involved in our community, and a couple of our services that we offer for them. We also work with developing a program with the Youth Build, Building Bridges, and Rising Grinds. Those are just a few programs that we like to let you know we are working with, and it is community involvement, and we also do more. So we do reach out to the community, and that's our focus when it comes to putting everyone together. So that being said, I'll pass this over to our colleague, Carlton Myers.
Good morning. My name is Carlton T. Mayers II, Esquire. I am the Special Advisor on Public Safety for the Grand Rapids branch of NAACP, and I've been working with them now for over a year on addressing the problems within the City of Grand Rapids administrative policy on surveillance, on the acquisition and use of surveillance equipment and surveillance services. So essentially, what this policy does is that it allows City Commission to work with specific government entities like the Grand Rapids Police Department, so that way they can purchase and use surveillance technology in this community. The problem is that there is little to no engagement with the public or involvement with the public on making these decisions. And so what we're trying to do is we have provided amendments to the city government, specifically being city manager, the city attorney, and also the Office of Oversight and Police Accountability, that outlines and details specific safeguards that would be put in place to allow community members, especially those from neighborhoods in this community where there's high levels of negative police encounters, such as racial profiling, excessive use of force, etc. We want to make sure that they are able to be involved in this decision-making process. And so, for instance, some of the examples Kareem laid out earlier, I'm going to go into a bit more detail on. One of them is that we want to have a citizen advisory committee or something like it put in place that has civilians on it that will essentially work with the city commission and with the Grand Rapids Police Department on making those decisions on acquiring, which also means purchasing, and using such technologies. And so that way the community has a voice in it, they're involved in it, and they're also involved in how it's going to evolve over time. The other thing we want to see is the creation of a surveillance impact report that would be published in advance of such technologies being used, and this would lay out what the potential impact would be when it comes to violating people's civil liberties and civil rights, breaking that information down by race, gender, age, and location, making sure this information is published on the city's website and the Grand Rapids Police Department's website, and allowing the public to have a public comment period where they can actually provide statements, whatever they think their feedback is on that equipment. The other thing we want to see is an after-action report. In other words, this report would be published annually, once again, on the city's website and the Grand Rapids Police Department's website. And now that we know that the technology has been used, this is after the fact, we're not talking about the projection of it, but we're talking about what is actually going to happen, that what has actually happened already. And so we're going to see what that impact has been, whose civil liberties have been violated, breaking that down by race, gender, age, allow public comment, so that way the City Commission can make an informed decision on if it's wise to continue to use this technology. Now, the reason why this is important is because at the end of the day, what our concern is that we've seen, looking at what's happened in other cities, seen what's happened here with the use of helicopters to do surveillance in the 3rd Ward, that it ultimately results in the exacerbation of over-policing of black and brown communities, which ultimately results in unnecessary harms and deaths of black and brown residents. There's one other thing I want to highlight. Kareem mentioned that there is an exemption clause that has to do with exigent circumstances. In other words, there is a clause in the existing policy that allows, like Grand Rapids Police Department and other city government agencies, to essentially that allows Grand Rapids and other city entities to essentially not have to adhere to the city approval process that's laid out in the policy under certain circumstances. Now, the only term they use is exigent circumstances. Now, that's problematic for 2 reasons. One is that there is no definition of it within the policy. So that's already an arbitrary clause that can be used for any purpose. That's dangerous. Number 2, exigent circumstances under the law only applies to use, never applies to purchasing anything. And we're talking about, in other words, like allowing government entities to infringe upon the 4th Amendment rights of civilians. In other words, search and seizure. That's the only time it is used under the law. So right now, the current language is legally invalid. And that is problematic for the city, for all kinds of legal reasons. So what we're trying to do is get rid of that language, put in these community safeguards so that the protections are in place, so when the technology is acquired, or if it's acquired, and when it's used, or if it's used, there's always community involvement, knowledge, and decision-making authority throughout the whole process. So that's what we're pushing for. And one last thing I want to say is that the reason why this is so important right now, like I said, I've been working with Grand Rapids branch for over a year now, is because about a month ago, President Biden made an announcement that America Rescue Plan funds that were originally meant to be used for COVID-19 are now opened up for state and local police to use it to address gun violence and violent crimes all throughout the country. So what we're concerned with is that the Grand Rapids Police Department will continue to try to use federal funds like they did last year, they tried to do last year with the CARES Act money, to purchase ShotSpotter, which is gun detection technology, which has not been proven to be effective in any city in America, unmanned drones, and helicopters. Now, we've already seen this year the way that the Grand Rapids Police Department has been using helicopters in the 3rd Ward to essentially harass the residents who are predominantly black and brown in that community. We've also seen a pattern of practice of the Grand Rapids Police Department engaging in racial profiling and excessive use of force. For instance, in spring this year, you had a gentleman, routine traffic stop, pulled over by police, African-American gentleman, ended up resulting in him getting hit in the face and head, which was caught on camera. He never assaulted the officers. We also saw how there were 2 African-American teenagers who had a gun pulled on them by a Grand Rapids police officer over a mistaken identity. So we know that this police department has already engaged in a pattern of practice of discriminatory policing and excessive use of force against black and brown residents. So we want to get ahead and be proactive instead of being reactive, and make sure that we get these safeguards put in the policy now and not after a black person or a brown person has been killed or brutalized by another Grand Rapids police officer. So at this point, we are working with the city government on that, and it looks like they are going to be making some progress, especially around the exigent circumstance language, but we don't know yet, and we're going to wait and see what happens. But in the meantime, we are advocating for these changes. So thank you very much.
With that said, I just want to add a couple of things before we go to questions. But as Carlton just stated, we did recently just have a meeting with the Office of Oversight and Accountability and other city officials, and they have agreed to make some changes in the policy that we feel are a step in the right direction. However, we do feel that there's still a lot of work to be done. So in addition to that, I just want to be clear that as we are addressing the surveillance technology policy on behalf of NAACP, our position right now is not that we are against the technology itself, but more so the policy that's currently in place does not protect the civil rights of the individuals who will be mostly impacted. And with that said, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for being present, and we will open it up for any questions.
So one thing you had mentioned a lot is this is, to protect the civil rights of the community and things like that. You had also mentioned that police had, that's where the police falter and things like that. Why hasn't there been, stronger relations between the police and the community in the past? Clearly, we all know the answer to that. But, I kept thinking, like, this is great now. Why are we at this point? Why wasn't it this way in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the developing and building the relationships between community and police, I think, has never really been where it should be. So I think what got us to this point is, just the community being fed up with not being engaged and involved, and essentially getting the bad end of the stick. And often what we see in relation to police and community is a more reactive approach, and what we're attempting to do here is take a more proactive approach to make sure that the protections are in place up front to avoid some of those problems that we've traditionally seen in the past with law enforcement.
You said some progress is being made as far as implementing the changes in the policy. Was it just that exigent piece, or was there more so far that they're willing, at least at this point, to take on?
Yeah, at this point, the main piece that they've addressed is specifically what you stated, the exigent circumstances piece, which we do feel is substantial and very important piece that needs to be changed. But there's still some concerns about some other areas in the policy as well. So at this time, they have agreed to that, and we'll continue to work with them, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Do you feel that the city is being too reliant on technology, thinking that will solve these issues, when that money could be allocated to other programs that you guys have mentioned that are already kind of underway?
Yeah, I think we do feel that way. I think we feel that it's just more of the traditional approach where the dollars consistently go to the same areas, where there's proven evidence that the work that's going on here at the center and there's other programs as well that we know have been proven to prevent crime. So we just want to uplift the voice of the community. I will be hosting a town hall this evening as well, so that we can uplift community voice and hear their feedback on what they'd like to see as far as changes in the policy.
Can I say something on that? And I also want to just say something on that as well, is that we've seen, just from looking at best practices in other parts of the country, a clear example, Vermont. I know a lot of people don't usually talk a lot about Vermont, but that's a good example of how there are community resources like restorative justice resources, especially for youth, where that essentially work with the court system as being a diversionary program. So instead of sending youth who commit offenses to be incarcerated and locked up, send them to a restorative justice program, work with law enforcement, working with community resources to create that pipeline. So that way they can learn accountability in a different way, but also build skill sets by having them, for instance, and I know in Vermont they have like a Recycle North, Bicycle North location where they send children who are in the system to learn how to build bikes from recycled parts of other bikes. And they also send them to the Ronald McDonald House to make food for children who, you know, are much younger than them. So that way they learn responsibility, they learn a trade, etc. And that's how you, number one, build value within people, and that's what makes them make different choices that are more constructive rather than destructive. But you have to not be siloed within your community. You cannot be siloed from community resources and law enforcement. You have to be interconnected. You have to be coordinated as one community. And so that's what we're trying to push for with what we're calling for, is that get out of the silos and let's all work together. There's a lot of good community resources here in Grand Rapids. The police department is not utilizing it enough.
And anyone can answer this question. I'm sorry if you were going to address something.
I just wanted to reiterate and make sure everyone was clear and understood regarding the policy or the change that Mr. Scales mentioned regarding President Biden and opening up these funds to the city. So they're doing these funds basically for technology. And our stance is we need you to allocate some of these funds for these programs that have a proven track record of helping the community itself. So if that funding is available, filter it. The NAACP works with partners all over to create programs, and we have programs currently that we mentioned that can absolutely use those funds. So just wanted to reiterate that.
And this is open to anyone. These sound great, they do. Do you think the police are going to be open to it? Do you think they'll take to it?
We've been in communication with all the powers that be in the city, and we continue to be in communication with them. They are a little slow getting back, but we continue because we know it's necessary. So we'll do what we need to do, and we'll continue to say and do what we have, work with what we have, but they do need to, I'd say, get a little more involved and engage with us and understand what we're asking for and work with us in that.
And I would add that we know that we're going to have a new police chief sometime next year. So I think that this is a very important moment for us to be involved, not only in NAACP, but the whole community, which is what a lot of communities have been doing, right? For some years now, including St. Louis City, they did that with their last police chief. So that they are involved in the selection process of the new police chief. Because to me, and I believe my colleagues as well, we want to know whoever's coming in, what's your view on this? What will you do to break the silos that currently exist in Grand Rapids, so that way you have community resources interconnected and coordinated with law enforcement? So I think this is a very important question, but I also think right now this is a key time to really hone in on that with the incoming police chief once that person is going to be selected. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
You wanna?
I'll just say really quick to answer, to piggyback off of that last question. I think that's a tough question, right? I do want to say thank you to the city officials for at least coming this far, but just want to say, you know, once again, that there's still a long way to go. So as far as them accepting all three amendments, so far I think they've been pretty receptive, but we don't know. Well, we really don't know what their position will be, but we will continue to fight for the rights of community and we'll continue to do the work that we do here on behalf of Grand Rapids NAACP.
I think it was mentioned earlier, but what sort of prompted us taking a look at the surveillance policy? I think maybe it was the change in the CARES Act, or sorry, the ARPA fund dollars.
Yeah, I think this started back over a year ago when there was interest on behalf of law enforcement to acquire shot spotter technology, and that kind of prompted the whole conversation around this policy itself. So we were advocating against the acquisition of shot spotter, and we were successful with getting them to change their mind and not using CARES Act dollars to acquire that technology. And in the process of that, we were made aware of this policy that we felt just had too many holes in it, and that we wanted to make sure there was a little bit stronger for the protections of the community. Any other questions? All right. Well, with that said, I want to thank you all. Carlton, if you have any other closing comments. We are excited to be hosting our town hall this evening. That information will be available via our platforms, social media platforms, and our website. And we ask community to come out, be a part of this conversation, share your feedback, as this is very important to us. And again, just to reiterate, we believe this is extremely important to protect the civil rights of community, and we'll be looking forward to hearing feedback from community.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you.